Hello comrades, this is our video for week 12. Our subject is the documentary film My Perestroika, and our teaching assistant today is Dante. Okay, as a reminder, this is our only video for week 12. I canceled one day of class, whatever day means in this context, in order to give you more time to work on your final papers. That means that we are not going to discuss together the text by Alexievich, Holland, and Kurchatov, which are listed as week 12, day 2 on your syllabus. Those materials are still on the course website, and you're very welcome to read them on your own. I do think that they're interesting. Speaking of your final papers, thank you to everyone who has submitted an introduction and an outline, and I'm looking forward to discussing those with you on Thursday and Friday of this week. Now, our primary source for today is the film My Perestroika, which focuses on the experience of a group of friends who were born in the 1960s, grew up under Brezhnev, and reached adulthood at the moment when Mikhail Gorbachev came to power and implemented his signature policies of glasnost and perestroika. As you saw, despite their common beginnings, the couple Borya and Lyuba, Olga, Andrei, and Ruslan all end up in very different situations. This is an example of the kind of primary source we use in social history. As I hope you've gathered from this class and others that you've taken, there are different ways to approach historical analysis. Last week, the essays we read, written by Andrei Sakharov and Alexander Solzhenitsyn, they gave us a taste of intellectual history, while Gorbachev's speech, Gorbachev Challenges the Party, directed us towards political history. Next week, we'll analyze a couple of music videos through the lens of cultural history. In fact, you might find it interesting to look back through our syllabus and sort of quiz yourself on which type of historical analysis each primary source works for best. In the meantime, though, social history is the study of everyday people and how they live, and I think that this documentary gives us some good insight into how the average person experienced perestroika. Okay, the historical context I gave you in my last video serves pretty well for this source, so I won't say very much more now. I'll just note that after Gorbachev resigned and the Soviet Union ceased to exist, Boris Yeltsin became the first president of the new Russian Federation, and we'll discuss that more in depth next week. Yeltsin was elected to 2 4-year terms, which is the maximum allowed under the Russian Constitution. He was elected in 1992. Remember, the Soviet Union ended on December 31st, 1991, so they had a caretaker government until the election in 92, and then Yeltsin was elected again in 96. His successor was, and still is, Vladimir Putin, who was elected in 2000 and 2004. This film was made in 2010, well, it came out in 2010, and the final event that it covers is the 2008 presidential election. Now remember, there's a two-term limit, so Putin couldn't run again in 2008 without changing the electoral law. So in the 2008 election, he stepped aside while his prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, ran for president. But as you can see from the political posters that show up at the end of the film, they promoted themselves as a team or a tandem. And when Medvedev won that election in 2008, he made Putin his prime minister. So they basically changed jobs. So if you're wondering how Putin ended up being the president again, well, stay tuned next week because we are going to talk more about that then. Okay, so here are some discussion questions for the film. Number 1. The film begins with Borya and Lyuba, who are history teachers at the same school they went to growing up. They live in the same apartment where Borya grew up, which was part of the wave of new housing construction instituted by Khrushchev. They're certainly not wealthy, but they seem to be doing okay. And they also seem to feel that they have, basically lived their lives well and made good choices. So consider their experience as you learned about it through the film. Do you think that they are right to feel that they're, satisfied with their lives? Would you consider them a success story of the post-Soviet transition? Why or why not? Number 2. Andrei and Ruslan present sharply contrasting cases. Remember, Andrei is the businessman, Ruslan is the punk musician. Each one feels that he has captured the high ground and looks down on the other. How has each of their paths been shaped by the political events that they lived through? In what ways is each of them a winner? In what ways is each of them a loser? Who do you think has the stronger claim to the high ground and why? So basically, I'm asking you to tease out the differences between Andrei and Ruslan, figure out how those differences connect to their experience of living through these events, and assess who you think has done a better job, basically, of making a post-Soviet life for himself. Number 3. As you watch these characters interact and tell their stories, consider the roles played by women and men and the outcomes for each gender. What does Olga's story reveal about the particular difficulties that women faced in the collapse of the Soviet Union? Lyuba has an easier life than Olga, but does she have it as good as the men around her? What similarities and differences do you find between their lives, so the lives on the one hand of Olga and Lyuba, and on the other, that of Olya, who was the heroine of A Week Like Any Other? What does this tell us about how gender has or has not changed through these political events? Number 4. The theme of nostalgia comes up quite often. Though none of these friends wants to go back to the Soviet Union, they all catch themselves missing it in different ways. Analyze one or more scenes in which the characters talk about nostalgia. You may find it helpful to consider the Soviet footage here as well, which the filmmakers interleave with their documentary footage. What exactly is it that they miss about the Soviet Union? Were they in some ways better off under Brezhnev? If so, how? If not, then why do they feel fondness for this time? If our country experienced a major political upheaval, do you think that you would feel nostalgic for your childhood and teenage years? Number 5. Borya and Ruslan identify themselves as nonconformists. Consider the scene where they talk about this issue. This comes up sort of in two places, from 18 minutes to 24 minutes, and again from 32 minutes to 34 minutes. So what does rebellion mean to them? What does Borya mean when he calls it romantic opposition as opposed to like real opposition? How do you understand the two friends dismissing their children's generation, How do you understand the two friends dismissing their children's generation as obsessed with money and not reading enough books? Do you think that these men in their generation pose a political threat to the Soviet system under Brezhnev? Why or why not? Number 6. Lyuba was not a nonconformist growing up, but when she talks about her time as a Komsomol activist and a believer in the struggle for peace, she bursts out laughing and mocks herself. What do you make of this laughter? How does it fit together with their common feeling of nostalgia? Why does Lyuba feel compelled to mock her former beliefs? Number 7. Perestroika was implemented as these friends reached adulthood. For Andrei, Borya, and Ruslan, this means that it occurred when they were doing their 2 years of compulsory military service, as all male citizens had to do after high school. Lyuba and Olga were at home, going to college. How do their reactions shape your understanding of the effects of perestroika and glasnost on Soviet society? How do they reveal the excitement and the problems created by these policies? Is there a gendered component to their reactions? What do you make of Lyuba's argument with her mother about Lenin? Number 8. Beginning at about 49 minutes in, the friends each describe their experience of the August 1991 coup attempt, which played a big part in the rise of Yeltsin and the collapse of the Soviet Union. What do their stories reveal about the lived experience of this moment? How did their different choices in that moment shape the way they remember it nearly 20 years later? Why does Andrei feel like he has to make excuses for not being there? Why does Ruslan think that the whole thing could have been a ruse? How might the experience have shaped their expectations and perspectives going forward into the Yeltsin presidency? Number 9. None of the friends is a fan of Yeltsin. In fact, they seem to be very disappointed by his presidency. We'll talk about the details of that time more next week, but from what you can gather from context here, what were some of the problems that Russia faced in the 1990s? Why did Ruslan, Borya, and Lyuba end up so disappointed? How does Andrei explain his success to himself? Why does Olga focus on personal issues and stay away from larger statements? How have their experiences since the 1990s shaped the way they look back on that time? Number 10. The film ends with the 2008 presidential election. Clearly, none of the friends believes that Russia operates as a genuine democracy, and they're all angry about it. Interestingly, the only one who votes in this election is Olga, and she makes a protest vote for a fringe candidate. How would you characterize this generation's view of the Putin era? What are the consequences for a country when people like them don't vote? Or will the country be fine without their votes? Those are my questions, and I look forward to your posts.